I did want to mention, because I believe that we're the only show with this kind of reach and this kind of roots in what it is that's happening in Cuba, to talk to you a little bit because of what this thing is that you guys are listening to and watching, and because many of you have seen us grow up over 17 years around here and know that we're a proudly Miami show, and know some of the history and weird politics over the last year that have happened in Miami that create great tensions, and the rest of the world, whether it's Elian Gonzalez or what's happening now in Cuba, it can feel very lonely to have 90 miles off our shore something that only we care about, that largely feels like America, which believes in freedom, isn't paying attention to. And so one of the places that it made an appearance, I don't know, 20 years ago with Elian Gonzalez, is the very idea of a mother dies at sea trying to get her son to freedom. Cubans understood that child needs to stay here. America was like, he needs to be with his father back in Cuba. And I think that's a fundamental disconnect between not understanding what it is to flee freedom or find freedom and just being born into freedom. And so what you're witnessing right now in Cuba is something I did not see happening in my lifetime. I thought, and it felt for a long time, like Fidel Castro was going to outlive my parents. He outlived my grandparents. I thought, and even though there's hope today, still fear that that regime, that communism, that free Cuba is not something my parents are going to ever get to see. But what I saw yesterday, I've never seen before, which is a people so desperate. And now keep in mind, when I say a people so desperate, Stugotz, these are people, that ocean is the world's largest graveyard. Haiti and Cuba, people trying to get to freedom with such desperation that they get on vehicles made of crap and tires and whatever else, and don't know if they're going to see their family again because of the level of desperation, and yet still they fear the government enough to choose that form of desperation versus protest in the streets desperation because we don't have medicine, we don't have food, we've reached a level of desperation that is uncommon, and Joe Biden just has such a legacy-making shot here on stopping suffering. Stopping suffering. Like I know all of this stuff, and more than ever now, just gets into the political realm, but the embargo has not worked, and that party with ESPN in tow went to Cuba and played baseball games under the idea of normalizing relations. And those people are so desperate for freedom, they're marching in the street. When marching in the street will get you thrown in a jail, Stugotz, for an indeterminate amount of time and with no need to explain it to anybody, never mind trials or anything. I've told you about, I think Cuba's still doing firing squads. They were recently.
But how does Joe Biden do that?
Just get in the game, first of all.
Yeah, but you're talking about military action, are you not?
I am talking about first being a leader that believes in freedom and takes up that cause publicly and with voice. Start there, okay?
Well, he did, and let's read the statement from Joe Biden on Cuba, as a lot of local politicians of national repute have been seizing on this opportunity. Usually, Cuban politicians are on the Republican part of the aisle. Joe Biden says of Cuba, "We stand with the Cuban people and their clarion call for freedom and relief from the tragic grip of the pandemic and from decades of repression and economic suffering to which they have been subjected by Cuba's authoritarian regime. The Cuban people are bravely asserting fundamental and universal rights. Those rights, including the right of peaceful protest and the right to freely determine their own future, must be respected. The United States calls on the Cuban regime to hear their people and serve their needs at this vital moment rather than enriching themselves."
You want him to do more? You want more?
I want a free Cuba. is
course,
what
right.
that's what
Yes.
I want. I am not a politician. I do not have solutions for you. I'm not the person who calls for violent military action as ever a solution. I'm just telling you that you've got a weakened people and you have the optics of these people are suffering so much that, again, I'm going to explain it to you again, Stugotz, a desperation so grave that ocean is a funeral home for people trying to get toward freedom. That desperation has never resulted in my lifetime in what I saw yesterday, which is streets flooding. They fear that government, Stugotz. People do not understand. They don't. I mean, I know that we make jokes about our devices listening to us and Alexa. They're neighborhood spies. They're your freedoms. You can't understand the lack of freedoms. Never mind food rations. I can't explain to you where the desperation has to be for those people to take to the streets when they fear that government so much in mass and said, do something to us. There are reasons that you haven't seen this since it so rarely and not since 1994.
But just so we're clear, them marching in the streets, just by doing that, they are taking a massive risk.
Yes.
Oh, huge.
Yep.
And the government's still oppressive in that way, even though Castro, for the first time in our lives, or well, first time in my life certainly, is not running the country. Fidel is gone. Raul Castro stepped down. Now the president of Cuba is Miguel Diaz-Cancel. And the people are marching in the streets, and it's something that I thought would resonate when I was growing up. The day is finally here that the Cuban people are marching the streets looking for freedom, and we've seen a lot of this in Hispanic countries, and it doesn't necessarily
work.
It doesn't resonate. The SOS calls, like it sweeps social media, but the United States has kind of gotten out of the great liberating military force game that they were a few years ago because of how widely unpopular those things landed, Dan.
Tony, where are you with this as a family that is proudly Cuban and a young person who, like, I mean, if my pain is borrowed, you're many years removed from the idea that your parents and grandparents are the ones who suffered this so that you would never have to suffer it.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario because as Cuban kids were taught about the evils of what happened in Cuba when, our grandparents and our parents' homes and jobs and basically livelihoods were taken away. And my grandfather passed away in 2013, and he was part of the Bay of Pigs invasion and was a political prisoner in Cuba for many years before he was, finally reunited with my grandmother and stuff. And just thinking about the opportunity that we all have right now feels like something that I didn't see coming in their lifetime or maybe in even my parents' lifetime. I thought this was going to be maybe 20 years in the future of, okay, people are in the streets. And I don't think it's to be like understated how important it is to see protests on the street in grainy videos because they don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have cell service to give a 5G like crystal clear coverage of what's happening. And it's crazy because I didn't think that we were going to be here, and just seeing that now and understanding that we have an opportunity as a people, as a country in the United States, even though we sort of are out of the democratization of other countries, I just feel like something's got to give right now.
This is such a rare circumstance, right? We can't agree on masks, right? We can't agree on facts. But Stugotz, you got the Republican Party is tied to Cuban allegiances, and now the Democratic Party with Obama normalizing relations and softening the embargo. You've got both parties would prefer a free Cuba. Both, like, you can't get agreement on anything.
It's not even that they don't have Wi-Fi and they don't have internet. It's that it gets shut down. So like the idea that some of those videos even got out is kind of crazy because they were shutting down the internet yesterday. They were shutting down power in places yesterday just to kind of stop the spread of information. And while it's something that I don't think a lot of us thought that we were ever going to see, it's also kind of a thing of, all right, but where does this go from yesterday, right? Because at a certain point, like you guys are saying, you can't have these demonstrations in Cuba. The government's not going to allow it. So that happened yesterday. But do they keep doing that? And what does that lead to? Because at a certain point, if they keep doing that, is the government going to start killing their own people in the streets to put an end to it? And once that happens, are people going to continue to demonstrate? Or is the government just going to decide, you know what, I'm done, I'm going to flee? And I think one of the frustrating things as a Cuban American, my father left Cuba when he was like 6 years old. One of the frustrating things is while we're all seeing what's happening over there, it becomes a political thing here where it's like, okay, the Castro regime was bad, but the Batista regime before that wasn't good. So was the Castro regime better or worse than that? And then it becomes a thing of, well, who's oppressing these people? And it's not about the oppression. Is it the embargo or is it the government? And it seems like the people who are suffering there always get lost because the people in this country, at least, are always fighting. And to Mike's point, what do you do if you're the US? Because congratulations for putting out a press release, but that's not going to change anything. But are you also going to intervene militarily? Because I don't know that it's their place to do that. So ultimately, the people are suffering, but I think a lot of it gets lost into finger pointing as to why they're suffering and not figuring out how do we help the suffering.
For the U.S. to get involved, the ball needs to be advanced way further down the field. And how do you do that? You militarize social media. You weaponize it if you're the people. And I don't know if you saw the viral video of a Cuban rapper getting arrested in his home. The rapper was very politically motivated, denouncing the authoritarian regime. He was thrown in jail for the crime of resistance. They control social media out there. So it's an uphill battle, no doubt. But this is the first time we've seen these images. And I thought when I was growing up that the U.S. would definitely do something. And this is something we've been waiting for our entire lives. And politics has changed.
Uprisings do not happen in Cuba. And the reason for that is fear of Billy's not overstating it. Fear of being shot in the street, because freedom, like, it is why Cubans speak so highly of freedom. I understand that we talk about the flag a lot, and in America we like to talk about freedom a lot, but very few of us are risking our lives, throwing our lives to the seasickness of the ocean on something made of tires, possibly leaving our family because the government fear is that high.
Well, we take it for granted, obviously.
I think the interesting thing that Mike said too about using social media as a weapon, and I think about things that happened in like Egypt in the Arab Spring where they were using Facebook almost against the government until things were wiped out. You don't even have that option in Cuba. It's like so limited of what you can see and what gets out to the outside world. Like Billy was saying, like the Wi-Fi, they'll just shut down the internet. Like, all right, you're not getting it anymore. And it's something that we don't even understand. We can't comprehend the lack of those kind of things.
You're being followed in Cuba when you're a tourist. There is a desperation that lacks jobs. I can give you a lot of stories like this, but as an example, the last time I was in Cuba 30 years ago, okay, kids were in the street with what looked like balloons. They weren't balloons. They were condoms. There are no balloons. There happened to be condoms for whatever the reason was. Livan Hernandez is a champion pitcher in baseball. He's climbing up and down the stairs with his bicycle and driving to the park in his uniform and washing his own uniform. And then when he goes to Japan with the national team, he is stealing detergent from the Japanese hotel because they need detergent back where he is. You're talking about a really uncommon desperation, and yet still, it's never been this. Never a desperation so great. The choice has been, Stugotz, in the dark of night, get on the tires and throw your life to the wind. Don't get away from the government. Don't challenge it. Go try the ocean. See if it works. Go via Mexico if you can. Like, I don't know how many times Jose Fernandez tried. His father tried 14 times. Jose Fernandez, I think, was the fourth time, and his mom is, falls off of the boat, and then they go the harder route through Mexico. That's been the better choice than what you saw yesterday. That's to get away from the oppression, not to challenge it.
But think of that level of desperation where that's the good choice. That for some people, not all, where that seems like the best choice of the choices given.
It would be it would be the choice of many people if you were brave enough to throw your life to the ocean.
There are places in Cuba that I believe are not even aware of what it is that's going on in the bigger cities. My wife was talking to her family yesterday. They told her the police are patrolling the street. No one's allowed to leave the house. That happened at 1:00 in the afternoon. And the reason they were told is because of COVID. Now, there is a very bad outbreak of COVID going on right now. but the power was shut off and the police were not letting anyone out of the house, while other parts in the bigger cities were protesting the government. Their control on information is not something that we in this country can understand. Another conversation that she had a couple of weeks ago was, oh, did you guys hear about the demonstrations during an exhibition baseball game that Cuba had here against, I believe it was Colombia, where there was protesters just on the field in the middle of the game, in the middle of Central Florida, holding up the game. And in Cuba, they thought that the game had been canceled, that the game didn't even happen. They didn't know that those demonstrations happened. They're told what it is that the government wants them to know. And they can shut off power and they can shut off electricity. And they don't know why it is that that's happening.
Normally, I would say it's a non-starter for the Biden administration to have anything of consequence on this outside of just the overriding message of freedom. We want freedom for everybody, but we're not going to get involved. But Biden was a part of the Obama administration that put forth an economic plan and normalized relations with Cuba to an extent. Now, the Trump administration tried to undo a lot of that, but these are the seeds of what the Obama administration was looking for when they argued for the economics of the deal. Biden was a part of that. So he does probably have to get a little bit more involved. Then he's going to get plenty of pressure from the opposite side of the aisle. And it's not just because Cuba matters. It's because Florida matters in terms of electoral votes. And that's why Cuba has been so politicized over the year, because Florida is perpetually a swing state.
Freedom, though, is a cause that no matter what we're disagreeing about, that both parties can agree on, and trying to help people not suffer is something. Obama, by doing what he did, by breaking down the walls on the embargo and bringing commerce to Cuba. You've seen what's happening in Miami, here in the streets of Miami, where the people who are free are asking, and many of those people are Republicans. Cubans vote Republican. They're asking for those people to be given a chance. It doesn't matter whether you think it's Cuba's government that has choked that country because it's still got 1950 Russian ladas in the street and it's stuck in a different time, or whether it's the American government that has choked that country. Both parties agree that those people need to stop suffering and that those people deserve freedom.
Right. And Cuba is often a point of frustration for Haitians, I think, too, because why are we giving this the megaphone that we're not giving Colombia or Venezuela? And we're speaking here a couple of days removed from
what happened in Haiti. Mm-hmm.
Leader being assassinated. And the reasons for that is still the Cuban base down here is so huge to swinging elections that you hear more about Cuba's foreign policy than you do about Haiti. And we should probably respect what's going on,
of course,
in Haiti a little bit more.
Well, I said he's got two chances. I said Biden's got two chances to do things that matter here with leadership. And what I'm telling you, Stugotz, is in my lifetime, and since my parents left in 1959, a regime that outlived my grandparents. This is the most vulnerable set of circumstances that have ever existed.
That's crazy.
For change. And you are right to question. Look, we can fight about any of this stuff, and you can be hopeless if you want. You can say all those SOS movements that haven't worked for whatever the reasons are that they haven't worked. But what I'm telling you is that we are right now in the middle of something I never thought I would see in my lifetime. I didn't have any reason to hope that it would exist in my lifetime, and that the situation is more ripe than it has ever been for leadership to actually affect change.